Hi everyone, welcome to our channel where we share meaningful and inspiring stories every day. Today, I want to take you on a journey. A story about kindness, transformation, and how small acts can create a big impact in someone's life. If you love heartfelt stories, life-changing lessons, and want to spread positivity to the world, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support means everything to us and helps us keep bringing more amazing stories to life. Now, let's dive into the incredible journey of three people from very different worlds who came together to create a story you won't want to miss. The sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting vivid hues of red, blue, and gold onto the polished wooden floor. The morning light seemed almost alive, dancing as the breeze outside gently moved the leaves of the towering oak trees nearby. The intricate patterns of the glass, a blend of saints, doves, and radiant beams of divine light, created an ethereal glow inside the chapel, making the moment feel both sacred and surreal. The air was filled with quiet murmurs, a symphony of whispers and soft laughter as the guests waited in anticipation. Rows of wooden pews lined the space, decorated with white satin ribbons and small bouquets of fresh lavender and baby's breath. The faint, soothing scent of the flowers mingled with the warm aroma of candle wax, giving the atmosphere an intimate and serene quality. Yet despite the tranquility, an undercurrent of excitement buzzed, as if the chapel itself could feel the importance of the occasion. At the front of the aisle, Michael stood tall in a meticulously tailored black tuxedo. His broad shoulders and confident posture exuded an air of composure, but the subtle way he adjusted his cufflinks betrayed a touch of nervousness. His face, cleanly shaven and glowing with a faint sheen under the golden light, bore a smile that seemed both serene and joyous. Yet, his dark eyes occasionally darted toward the double doors of the chapel, the source of his growing anticipation. Today was the day he had awaited for months, a day he hoped would mark a fresh start for himself and his son. Beside him stood Alex, his 8-year-old son, dressed in a tiny suit that mirrored his father's. The little boy held a small, satin-covered pillow in his hands, the golden wedding rings resting delicately atop it. His dark curls had been carefully combed, though a single lock rebelliously curled over his forehead. His suit was impeccable, the fabric crisp, the bow tie perfectly aligned. On the surface, he was the picture of a proud ring bearer, but his eyes, large, brown, and shadowed with unease, told a different story. "Dad, you look really great today," Alex whispered, his voice soft yet earnest. His small hands clutched the pillow tightly, the tips of his fingers turning pale with the effort. Michael glanced down, his warm smile broadening as he gently tousled Alex's hair. "Thanks, buddy," he said, his tone filled with genuine affection. "You're the best ring bearer a dad could ask for. I'm so proud of you." Alex attempted to smile, but it was fleeting. His lips trembled slightly before settling into a tight line. Inside, his heart raced, pounding so loudly in his chest that he was sure his father could hear it. The little boy's gaze remained fixed on Michael, as if seeking reassurance or perhaps silently warning him. Around them, the whispers grew quieter, and the soft strains of a violin began to play. The melody was gentle, almost melancholic, weaving its way through the chapel like a silken thread. As the first notes of the wedding march filled the air, the congregation collectively rose to their feet. All eyes turned toward the grand double doors at the back of the chapel. Alex, however, did not look. While every other head craned to catch a glimpse of the bride, his gaze stayed firmly on his father, studying his every movement and expression. His small hands trembled slightly, but his grip on the pillow never wavered. There was a tension in the boy's demeanor, a sense of urgency that would seem misplaced to anyone unaware of the storm swirling in his young mind. The heavy doors creaked open, revealing Clara. She stood poised at the entrance, framed by the golden morning light streaming in behind her. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of lace and silk, hugging her slender frame before flaring out into a cascade of shimmering white. The intricate beadwork along the bodice sparkled like tiny stars, and the long, flowing veil trailed behind her like a river of light. Her golden hair cascaded down her back in soft waves, framing a face that was radiant with confidence and poise. She smiled as she stepped forward, the picture of a perfect bride. Each of her steps was measured and deliberate, her heels clicking softly against the stone floor. Clara's gaze was steady, meeting the admiring eyes of the guests with an ease that seemed almost rehearsed. To those watching, she was a vision of grace and beauty, a woman deeply in love. But to Alex, there was something else. Something unsettling in the way she moved, in the way her eyes gleamed just a little too brightly. Michael's face lit up as she approached. His smile widened, and a faint flush crept across his cheeks. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she reached his side. His voice was low, meant only for her, but it carried the weight of his adoration. Clara tilted her head, her lips curving into a soft smile. "Thank you," she replied, her voice equally tender. "I can't wait to start our life together." As the officiant began the ceremony, his deep voice resonating through the chapel, Alex felt his chest tighten. The words washed over the guests, their meaning lost on the boy who stood silently at his father's side. To everyone else, the moment was joyous, a celebration of love and new beginnings. But for Alex, each passing second felt like an eternity, a step closer to something he couldn't allow to happen. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass shifted slightly, casting Clara's face in a kaleidoscope of colors. Red, blue, and gold. To the guests, it was a magical sight, an omen of blessings. But Alex couldn't shake the weight in his chest. He felt as if the colorful beams were warning him, urging him to act. Images from the past few months flared in Alex's mind like fragments of a shattered mirror, sharp and disjointed, yet impossible to ignore. Each memory struck him with a clarity that made his stomach churn. He could see Clara's first visit to their home as if it were happening all over again. The warm glow of the setting sun filtering through the windows. The faint scent of the fresh lilies Michael had placed on the dining table. And Clara stepping in with an air of effortless perfection. Her smile was dazzling, her voice melodic, and her laughter contagious. Michael had been enchanted from the moment she spoke, and even Alex had to admit she seemed flawless. At first, Clara's presence brought an air of excitement to their home. She would engage Michael in light-hearted conversations, offer compliments with impeccable timing, and even remembered small details about Alex's favorite hobbies. Her charm was magnetic, pulling everyone into her orbit. But Alex, with the unfiltered intuition of a child, felt something he couldn't articulate. It was a faint unease that stirred every time Clara walked into a room, a whisper in his gut telling him something wasn't right. Evenings at the dinner table were always lively when Clara was around. She would recount stories with perfect pacing, her words flowing like honey, keeping Michael thoroughly entertained. But Alex began to notice cracks in her facade. He saw the way her eyes would occasionally flicker with irritation if a story didn't land as expected, or if Alex interrupted with an innocent question. Her kindness seemed rehearsed, her affection deliberate, and when Michael stepped out of the room, her warm demeanor would vanish like mist under the sun. He remembered one particular evening vividly. The family was gathered in the living room after dinner, and Clara was recounting a tale from her childhood. Michael's laughter echoed through the room, but Alex noticed how Clara's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was subtle, but the boy couldn't ignore it. Later that night, as he passed by the kitchen, he overheard her on the phone. Her voice, usually so sweet, was now sharp and low, filled with urgency. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing," she whispered. "The documents will be ready soon. We just need a little more time." Alex's heart sank as he leaned against the wall, struggling to process what he had just heard. From that moment, he began paying closer attention. He saw how Clara would glance at the stack of papers Michael often left on the dining table, how her expression would tighten when she thought no one was watching. He noticed how her smile disappeared entirely when she was alone, replaced by a look that was cold and calculating. Now, standing in the chapel, Alex couldn't shake the weight of those memories. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows painted Clara in vibrant hues of red, blue, and gold, making her appear almost ethereal. To the guests, she looked like a vision of grace, her radiant smile matching the brilliance of the light that framed her. But to Alex, the scene felt like a warning. The colors seemed to dance with urgency, telling him to act before it was too late. As the officiant continued the ceremony, his deep, steady voice filling the chapel, Alex's gaze darted to Clara. Her expression remained serene, her smile unwavering, but her eyes, those sharp, glinting eyes, betrayed her. They flickered with something he couldn't quite name, something that set his heart racing. He tightened his grip on the satin pillow, the delicate gold bands resting atop it trembling with each breath he took. His small hands began to sweat, but he held firm. He couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, the unshakable certainty that Clara was hiding something. His father stood beside her, blissfully unaware, his face glowing with happiness. Alex glanced at Michael, his heart aching at the thought of what could happen if he didn't speak up. His mind wandered back to the days he spent with Michael at Phoenix Innovations. He remembered walking into the sleek modern building for the first time, its glass walls reflecting the brilliant blue of the sky. The atrium had been breathtaking, dominated by the company's logo, a golden phoenix with wings outstretched, symbolizing triumph and rebirth. The logo was everywhere, from the stationery on Michael's desk to the elegant signage above the reception area. "Do you see that, Alex?" Michael had said one evening, crouching down to meet his son's gaze. His voice carried a note of pride that Alex had rarely heard before. "This company is more than just a place to work. It's something your mom and I built together from the ground up. It's our legacy." Alex had nodded solemnly, his young mind grasping the weight of his father's words. He felt a swell of pride as he looked at the phoenix, its golden feathers catching the light. To him, the logo wasn't just a design, it was a symbol of his parents' shared dreams and hard work. Every visit to Phoenix Innovations became an adventure, a chance to learn more about his family's story. The walls of Michael's office were adorned with photos of corporate events, awards for innovation, and snapshots of his parents smiling together during the company's early days. On one particular afternoon, while Michael was busy in a meeting, Alex had wandered through the office, marveling at the bustling energy around him. He eventually found himself in the reception area, where the polished marble floors gleamed like a mirror under the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Diane, Michael's longtime assistant, had waved him over with a warm smile. "Alex, how's my favorite visitor today?" she asked, her voice bright and cheerful. "I'm good," Alex replied, climbing onto a chair near her desk. His legs swung back and forth as he looked around. "Dad says this place is really important." Diane chuckled softly, her kind eyes twinkling. "He's right, you know. Your dad and mom worked so hard to make Phoenix Innovations what it is today." Alex's ears perked up at the mention of his mom. "Did mom help a lot?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Diane's expression softened. "Oh, absolutely. Your mom was one of the most talented people I've ever met. Do you see the Phoenix logo everywhere? She helped design it. She said it should symbolize hope, resilience, and growth, everything this company stands for." The thought of his mother's involvement had filled Alex with a sense of connection to the company and its legacy. Now, as he stood in the chapel, the weight of that legacy pressed down on him. Clara's smile might have fooled the others, but Alex knew better. Her presence felt like a threat to everything his family had built, and he couldn't stay silent any longer. The officiant's voice paused briefly, signaling a shift in the ceremony. Alex's chest tightened. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd. Taking a deep breath, he looked up at his father, his small frame trembling with both fear and determination. "This is it," he thought. "I have to speak now." The words formed on his lips, and before he could second-guess himself, Alex stepped forward. His voice, though small, cut through the quiet. "Dad," he said, his heart pounding, "you can't marry her." From that moment on, Alex viewed Phoenix Innovations as more than just a company. To him, it was a living testament to his parents' dedication, vision, and shared passion for creating something meaningful. The sleek, modern offices with their glass partitions and polished wood furnishings felt imbued with stories of resilience and triumph. Every corner of the building seemed to whisper a piece of history. His parents' late nights working on big projects, the celebrations of milestones, and the friendships they had cultivated along the way. For Alex, stepping into Phoenix Innovations was like stepping into a part of his family's legacy, and even the smallest tasks, handing out papers, fetching coffee, felt like contributions to a larger narrative. But when Clara came into their lives, the air in the office began to change, almost imperceptibly at first, but undeniably. Her charm had a way of filling every room she entered, her laughter light and melodic, her demeanor effortlessly polished. She carried herself with an elegance that drew people in, disarming them with her quick wit and easy smile. At first, Alex wanted to believe that she was as perfect as she seemed. She listened attentively as Michael shared stories about the company's humble beginnings, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that appeared thoughtful. However, as weeks turned into months, Alex began to notice cracks in her polished facade. It was subtle. The way her eyes moved around the office during their visits. They didn't linger on the artifacts of success or the sentimental photographs of Michael and Alex that adorn his office. Instead, they darted around with an analytical sharpness, as though she were taking mental notes or assessing the value of what she saw. Her gaze didn't convey admiration. It felt like calculation, and that made Alex uneasy. One particular day stood out vividly in Alex's mind, etched there with a clarity that made his chest tighten even now. Michael had decided to bring Clara to the office to meet the team for the first time. The early morning sunlight streamed through the expansive windows of the building's atrium, casting long beams of light that illuminated the golden crimson Phoenix logo on the wall. The office was alive with the usual hum of activity. Employees typing, phones ringing, the occasional burst of laughter echoing from a distant meeting room. Clara arrived impeccably dressed in a tailored navy dress that hugged her figure, a string of pearls glinting at her neck. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the tiled floor as she walked beside Michael, who beamed with pride. The staff greeted her warmly, their faces lighting up with curiosity and admiration. She responded in kind, her voice soft but confident, her smile perfectly measured. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Clara," Michael announced, his voice carrying through the space. "She's been hearing so much about all of you, and I thought it was time she saw the magic of Phoenix Innovations for herself." Clara chuckled lightly, a sound that seemed rehearsed but still managed to charm those listening. "I've been so excited to visit," she said, her tone as smooth as silk. "Michael speaks so highly of everyone here. It's clear this company is truly special." Alex trailed a few steps behind them, his small legs struggling to keep up with their brisk pace. At first, he felt a swell of pride as his father guided Clara through the halls, pointing out various departments and sharing anecdotes about the company's history. But as the tour progressed, Alex's excitement gave way to unease. Clara's responses felt hollow. She smiled when expected, laughed when prompted, but her reactions lacked the genuine curiosity Alex had seen in other visitors. Her gaze didn't linger on the framed awards lining the walls, or the photographs of Michael and his team celebrating milestones. Instead, it flicked to the corners of rooms, the placement of desks, the way files were organized. Once, she paused near the glass-walled conference room, her eyes narrowing slightly, as though calculating something Alex couldn't understand. When they returned to the car that evening, the golden glow of the setting sun bathed the parking lot in a warm light. Michael hummed softly to himself, clearly pleased with how the visit had gone. But Alex couldn't contain his growing discomfort any longer. "Dad," he began, his voice hesitant but steady, "why didn't Clara ask more questions about the company? She didn't seem very interested." Michael let out a soft laugh, ruffling Alex's hair affectionately. "She's just shy, buddy," he said, dismissing the concern with a wave of his hand. "It's a lot to take in on her first visit. Give her some time." Alex wanted to believe him, to accept the reassurance and let the unease fade. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Clara's disinterest wasn't shyness. It felt calculated, as though she were deliberately avoiding drawing attention to what she was truly thinking. The thought lingered in the back of his mind, like an itch he couldn't scratch, refusing to be ignored. Each subsequent visit to the office only deepened Alex's suspicions. Clara would ask surface-level questions that seemed designed to steer the conversation away from the company's inner workings. She never lingered too long on the company's achievements, always redirecting the discussion toward Michael himself. She seemed far more interested in him as a person than in the legacy he had built with Phoenix Innovations. And always, there was that glint in her eyes, a flicker of something Alex didn't yet have the words to describe, but instinctively knew was wrong. As Clara's presence in their lives grew, Alex's unease turned into a quiet determination to uncover the truth. He began watching her more closely, noting every glance, every question, every moment when her polished exterior seemed to slip. It wasn't much, just fleeting glimpses of something darker beneath her charm, but it was enough to plant the seed of doubt firmly in Alex's mind. Her charm might have fooled the staff, even Michael, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that her presence wasn't as harmless as it seemed. Clara's laughter still filled the air, her elegance still turned heads, but to Alex, she was no longer the perfect woman she appeared to be. She was a puzzle, one he was determined to solve. One sunny afternoon, Michael decided to bring Clara to Phoenix Innovations to introduce her to his team. The office was bustling with activity as usual, with the hum of conversations, the tapping of keyboards, and the occasional sound of laughter echoing through the glass-walled conference rooms. The bright open layout of the building was bathed in natural light streaming in from the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a welcoming atmosphere that Alex always associated with his father's hard work and legacy. As they entered the building, Clara was dressed impeccably, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floors. She greeted everyone with a dazzling smile, her voice warm and pleasant as she exchanged pleasantries with the staff. Michael's face lit up with pride as he walked beside her, gesturing toward the various departments and sharing anecdotes about the company's history. He spoke with enthusiasm, pointing out the milestones that Phoenix Innovations had achieved over the years and the challenges they had overcome together as a team. Alex followed a few steps behind, his small hands shoved into the pockets of his neatly pressed trousers. He loved coming to the office, but today felt different. As his father spoke, Alex noticed that Clara's responses seemed mechanical. She laughed at all the right moments, nodded when Michael emphasized an important point, but her eyes told a different story. They weren't filled with curiosity or admiration like most people's when hearing about the company's accomplishments. Instead, her gaze wandered around the office, darting from one detail to another as if she were studying the environment for reasons unknown. At one point, Michael paused to show Clara the company logo prominently displayed in the atrium, a majestic golden phoenix with its wings spread wide, symbolizing resilience and growth. "This logo represents everything we stand for," Michael said proudly. "It's not just a company, it's our family's legacy." Clara smiled politely, tilting her head as though admiring the design, but Alex caught the brief flicker in her eyes. It wasn't admiration, it was calculation. It was as though she were assessing the value of what she was seeing, rather than appreciating its meaning. As they left the office that evening, the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the building in a warm glow. Alex glanced up at his father, his young face clouded with confusion. "Dad, why didn't Clara ask more questions about the company? She didn't seem that interested." Michael chuckled, ruffling Alex's hair affectionately. "She's just shy, buddy. It's a lot to take in on her first visit. Give her some time, and I'm sure she'll love this place as much as we do." Alex didn't say anything more, but his unease remained. To him, Clara's apparent disinterest wasn't shyness, it was something else entirely. The way she moved through the office, the fleeting glances she cast at certain areas, and the overly practiced way she responded to Michael's stories all seemed wrong. In the weeks that followed, Alex began to notice more peculiarities. Clara's charm and composure never wavered when she was around Michael, but there were moments when she thought no one was watching, when her mask slipped. Alex would catch her staring out of the window with a faraway look in her eyes, or glancing at her phone with a sharp, focused expression. One afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. Michael was away on a business trip, leaving Alex alone with Clara. The silence seemed heavier than usual, broken only by the steady ticking of the wall clock in the hallway and the faint rustling of leaves outside the window. The late afternoon sun streamed through the curtains, giving the house an eerie stillness. Alex was at his desk, his small hands steadying the notebook he was writing in as he worked on a school project. The scratch of his pencil against the paper was rhythmic, almost soothing, until a sound broke through the quiet. A voice. Clara's voice. It came from the living room, soft at first, but there was something in her tone that caught Alex's attention. It wasn't the usual warmth or politeness she used around Michael. This voice was clipped, hurried, and filled with an urgency that made Alex's pencil falter mid-sentence. He set it down carefully, listening intently. The words were muffled, but the tone was unmistakably serious. Curiosity mingled with unease as Alex pushed his chair back quietly and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. The cool banister felt smooth under his fingers as he leaned over just enough to catch snippets of Clara's conversation. Her voice was sharper now, every word precise and deliberate. Transfer shares, Phoenix Innovations, she said, her tone efficient, almost businesslike. Alex froze, his breath catching in his throat. Phoenix Innovations, his father's company. He leaned closer, his small fingers gripping the banister tightly. Yes, the paperwork is almost ready, Clara continued. There was a pause. The faint hum of a voice on the other end of the call, too low for Alex to make out. Clara's reply came quickly, her tone now colder, calculated. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Michael trusts me completely. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, the rhythmic beating almost drowning out her words. His stomach twisted as he strained to hear more. The name she spoke next struck him like a bolt of lightning. John, we'll need to move quickly once everything is signed. The timing has to be perfect. The name John sent a shiver down Alex's spine. He didn't know anyone by that name, and the way Clara said it, calm and commanding, made him certain this was someone his father wouldn't want near his business or their family. For a moment, Alex stood frozen, his fingers gripping the banister so tightly his knuckles turned white. The quiet house felt suffocating now, its stillness amplifying every sound. He wanted to march down the stairs, demand answers, tell Clara to stop whatever she was planning. But he didn't move. His small frame trembled as he crept back to his room, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Back at his desk, Alex stared at his unfinished project, but the words on the page blurred. His thoughts were consumed by what he had overheard: transfer, shares, Phoenix Innovations. The pieces didn't fit together completely, but they formed a picture that filled him with dread. Clara was planning something, and it wasn't good. His instincts screamed that his father's trust in her was misplaced, but how could he prove it? He was just a child, and the weight of his suspicions felt almost unbearable. Over the next few days, Alex's unease grew. Clara's behavior often shifted when Michael wasn't around, revealing a colder, more detached side of her personality. The cheerful, attentive woman who charmed Michael and laughed easily with him would disappear when they were alone, replaced by someone far less warm. One afternoon, as Alex sat at the dining table, finishing his homework, he decided to try bridging the growing gap between them. Maybe, he thought, if he could connect with her, the coldness would melt away, and he could make sense of the person she truly was. Miss Clara? He began tentatively, looking up from his notebook. His voice was soft but hopeful. Today, in class, we learned about space. Did you know that— Quiet! Clara snapped, cutting him off mid-sentence. Her voice was sharp, the tone slicing through the air like a blade. Alex flinched, his eyes widening as he stared at her. Clara didn't look up from her phone, her fingers tapping briskly against a screen. "I'm busy," she added, her voice curt and dismissive. "Just do your work and stop talking." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Alex felt his chest tighten, the sting of her reaction hitting harder than he expected. His small shoulders slumped as he looked down at his notebook, the excitement he had felt moments ago fading into silence. He gripped his pencil tightly, but the words he wanted to write wouldn't come. The warmth and friendliness Clara displayed around Michael had vanished completely, replaced by an icy indifference that made Alex feel small and unwelcome in his own home. That evening, as the sound of Michael's car pulling into the driveway echoed through the quiet house, Alex watched Clara transform. It was like watching someone put on a mask. The coldness melted away in an instant, and by the time Michael stepped through the door, Clara was her usual charming self. "Michael!" she exclaimed, her voice warm and inviting as she walked over to greet him. Her smile was bright, her laughter soft and melodic. "How was your day?" Michael set his bag down, his face lighting up at the sight of her. Busy, but good," he replied, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Alex sat in the shadows of the living room, his small hands clutching the edge of a chair as he watched them. Clara's laughter filled the air as she listened attentively to Michael recount his day, her tone dripping with affection. To anyone else it would have seemed natural, effortless, but Alex couldn't unsee the way she had treated him just hours earlier, the irritation in her eyes, the sharpness in her voice. The duality of her behavior left Alex confused, hurt, and increasingly wary. He watched them from the corner of the room, his heart heavy with the realization that the Clara Michael saw wasn't the Clara he knew. And, as her laughter echoed through the house, Alex felt a growing determination in his chest. Whatever Clara was hiding, he would find out. For his father's sake, and for the legacy his parents had built together, Alex knew he couldn't stay silent. The night before the wedding, Alex lay motionless in his bed, staring at the ceiling as the silver glow of moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting shifting patterns that seemed almost alive. The room felt vast and oppressive in the stillness, each faint creak of the floorboards echoing like a distant whisper. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, its soft murmurs only amplifying the silence within the house. Alex's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, his mind a swirling storm of worry and doubt. His thoughts raced, replaying fragments of Clara's behavior that he had tried so hard to dismiss. The way her laughter would fade into cold indifference when Michael wasn't around. The whispered urgency of her phone calls, filled with words that seemed to carry sinister weight. Shares, transfers, Phoenix Innovations, the hidden documents he had stumbled upon, their cryptic legal jargon hinting at betrayal. Piece by piece, the picture was coming together in his mind, and the more it formed, the more Alex felt the dread settling into his bones. Clutching his pillow tightly, Alex rolled onto his side. The fabric was cool against his cheek, but it did little to calm the heat rising in his chest. What if I'm wrong, he thought, his young heart heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The possibility gnawed at him, pulling him into a loop of questions that offered no answers. What if Dad doesn't believe me? What if he gets angry for speaking out? The thought made Alex's stomach churn, but alongside his doubt was an instinct he couldn't ignore. It was like a voice deep inside him, quiet but firm, urging him to act. He had seen too much, overheard too many things to let his fear keep him silent. His father deserved to know the truth, no matter how difficult or painful it might be to share. The clock ticked on, each second stretching into an eternity. As the hours passed, exhaustion finally began to take its toll. Alex's eyelids grew heavy, and despite his restless thoughts, sleep claimed him. But it was far from peaceful. His dreams were haunted by Clara's cold, calculating gaze, and the echo of the name John, whispered over and over again like a warning he couldn't escape. Shadows twisted and morphed in his dreams, turning familiar faces into strangers and filling him with a growing sense of urgency. When Alex woke, it was to the soft light of dawn spilling into his room. For a moment, he lay still, letting the warmth of the morning sun chase away the remnants of his restless dreams. But the heaviness in his chest remained, a reminder that the day ahead would bring challenges he couldn't avoid. The small chapel was already buzzing with energy by the time Alex arrived with his father. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, illuminating the polished pews and casting vibrant patches of color onto the floor. The air was filled with the soft hum of conversation as guests filled the room, their excited chatter blending harmoniously with the gentle strains of a violinist playing near the altar. Alex stood at the front of the aisle, his small hands gripping the pillow that held the wedding rings. His suit was immaculate, the dark fabric pressed to perfection, and his bow tie sat neatly against the crisp white of his shirt. From the outside, he looked like the perfect ring bearer, but his face betrayed the storm brewing inside him. His gaze flickered nervously, darting from the rows of smiling guests to the double doors at the back of the chapel. Beyond those doors, Clara waited. Alex felt his chest tighten at the thought of her walking down the aisle, her radiant smile masking the secrets he knew she was hiding. Beside him, Michael stood tall and composed, his posture confident and his face glowing with happiness. He glanced down at Alex and gave him a reassuring smile, completely unaware of the turmoil churning in his son's mind. Alex tried to return the smile, but it faltered almost immediately. His small fingers curled tighter around the satin pillow, his knuckles turning white. He glanced up at his father, a pang of guilt hitting him as he considered what might happen if he spoke up. But that same instinct, that quiet, unshakable voice, rose within him again. It reminded him why he couldn't stay silent. The violinist's music shifted, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. The chatter among the guests faded into quiet anticipation, and Alex's heart began to race. His breathing quickened as he stared at the doors, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. It wasn't just fear that he felt now, it was resolve. His father's happiness depended on this day, on this moment. But Alex knew that the cost of letting the wedding continue would be far greater than the discomfort of speaking the truth. He had to act, even if his voice trembled, even if his father didn't believe him at first. As the first notes of the wedding march echoed through the chapel, Alex felt his pulse quicken. The double doors began to open, revealing Clara in her elegant gown, her golden hair catching the light like a halo. The guests gasped softly, their faces lighting up with admiration. But Alex's stomach twisted as he looked at her. This was it, the moment he had dreaded and prepared for all night. He took a deep breath, his small frame trembling with the effort, and tightened his grip on the pillow. He didn't know how his father would react or how the guests would respond, but he couldn't let that stop him. "Dad," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible over the music. Then, louder with a tremor of determination, "Dad, you can't marry her." The chapel fell silent. All eyes turned toward Alex, their expressions a mix of confusion and surprise. Beside him, Michael looked down, his brows furrowing in concern. "Alex?" he asked gently, his voice low. "What's wrong?" Alex's chest rose and fell with shaky breaths as he met his father's gaze. His small hands trembled, but his resolve held firm. "She's not who you think she is," he said, his voice steady despite the fear pounding in his chest. "She's hiding something, Dad. I can't let you marry her." The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. Alex's heart pounded as he waited for his father's response, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the silent chapel. As the ceremony began, the officiant's deep, calming voice filled the chapel, a low resonance that seemed to settle over the gathered crowd like a comforting blanket. The guests rose in unison, their chairs scraping softly against the polished wooden floors. A hush fell over the room, as all heads turned toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the chapel. Slowly, the doors swung open with a creak that echoed in the stillness. Clara appeared, framed by the golden light streaming through the entrance. Her white gown shimmered subtly as she stepped forward, the fabric catching the rays of sunlight and reflecting them in a soft, almost ethereal glow. Her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders like a waterfall, each curl perfectly arranged to give the illusion of effortless beauty. Her veil trailed behind her, a diaphanous wisp of fabric that floated gracefully with her movements. The collective gasp of admiration from the crowd was audible, a wave of awe and approval rippling through the pews. Guests exchanged whispers about how radiant she looked, some even dabbing at their eyes as the scene unfolded. But for Alex, the sight of Clara didn't inspire awe or admiration. It made his chest tighten with unease. He felt as if he were watching a scene from a play, every detail too perfect, too rehearsed. His small hands gripped the satin pillow tighter, the gold rings wobbling slightly as his knuckles turned white. His shallow breaths came quicker now, the weight of what he knew pressing down on him. As Clara glided down the aisle, her serene smile never wavered. She seemed to radiate confidence, each step measured and deliberate, her eyes flicking briefly toward Michael with an expression of triumph. When she reached the altar and took her place beside him, Michael turned to her, his face glowing with happiness. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice filled with genuine emotion. "Thank you," Clara replied softly, her tone dripping with affection. The exchange elicited a soft sigh from the crowd, but Alex felt his stomach churn. He saw what no one else seemed to notice, a fleeting glint in Clara's eyes, something cold and calculating that betrayed the warmth of her smile. It was there for just a moment, but it was enough. His chest felt tight, his heart pounding in his ears. He couldn't wait any longer. The officiant continued, his steady voice reciting the familiar phrases that marked the beginning of a marriage ceremony, but Alex barely heard him. The sound of his own heartbeat drowned out everything else. His legs felt like lead, his throat dry as sandpaper, but beneath the fear was something stronger, the weight of his father's trust and the truth he carried. He took a deep breath, his small frame trembling as he mustered every ounce of courage he had. "Dad," Alex said, his voice cracking but loud enough to pierce the stillness of the room. The officiant paused mid-sentence, his voice trailing off as a wave of confusion swept over the guests. All heads turned toward Alex, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity. Michael froze, his head snapping toward his son. "Alex?" he said, his brows furrowing in concern. Alex stepped forward, his small feet making barely a sound on the wooden floor. His hands shook as he clutched the pillow, but his resolve remained unshaken. "You can't marry her, Dad," he said, his voice steadier now. "She's not who you think she is." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd as the guests shifted in their seats. Clara's serene smile faltered for the briefest moment, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she quickly regained her composure, letting out a soft, almost dismissive laugh. "Alex," she said sweetly, her voice filled with an exaggerated patience. "What are you talking about, sweetheart? You're just nervous about today, aren't you?" But Alex didn't back down. His gaze shifted to his father, tears brimming in his wide eyes. "I'm not making this up, Dad," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I found papers in the storage room, documents about the company. She's been planning to take it from you. And she's working with someone named John." Michael's face went pale, his lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. He turned slowly to Clara, his eyes searching hers for answers. Clara's expression hardened for the briefest moment, her composed mask cracking under the weight of Alex's words. She let out a scoff, her tone turning defensive. "Michael, he's just a child. He doesn't know what he's talking about." But Alex wasn't finished. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the crumpled papers he had hidden and held them out to his father. "Read them," he urged, his small voice tinged with desperation. Michael took the papers with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the text quickly, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, then to anger. His grip on the papers tightened as he turned back to Clara. "Clara," he said, his voice low and steady but simmering with fury, "what is this?" Clara took a step back, her carefully constructed composure slipping further. "Michael, it's not what it looks like," she began, her tone pleading. "Don't lie to me," Michael snapped, his voice rising. "I trusted you. You've been planning this all along, haven't you?" Clara's eyes darted toward the doors, a flicker of panic crossing her face as she calculated her next move. But before she could take a step, one of Michael's friends standing near the aisle moved forward and blocked her path. Michael pulled out his phone, his fingers steady despite the anger radiating from him. He dialed the police, his voice firm as he explained the situation. The guests sat in stunned silence, their gazes fixed on the unfolding drama. As the authorities arrived and escorted Clara away, Michael turned to Alex. He dropped to one knee, pulling his son into a tight embrace. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You saved me, Alex. I should have listened to you sooner. You're braver than I ever realized." In that moment, the chapel seemed to glow with a different kind of light. Not the colorful beams of the stained glass or the flicker of candles, but a light born of truth, love, and the unshakable bond between a father and his son. As the truth settled over the room, the chapel fell into a deafening silence. The murmurs of disbelief from the guests faded, and all eyes turned toward Michael. He stood frozen at the altar, the weight of betrayal sinking heavily into his shoulders. The crumpled papers in his hands trembled slightly as his grip tightened, his knuckles stark white against the fine parchment. It was a moment of clarity, painful and raw, but it was also the beginning of something new, something stronger. Slowly, Michael turned toward Alex, his face a mix of emotions: pain, regret, and an overwhelming sense of pride. His dark eyes, glassy with unshed tears, found his son's. Alex stood just a few feet away, looking up at him with a mix of fear and relief, his small chest rising and falling with deep, steadying breaths. The pillow that had once held the wedding rings lay forgotten on a nearby pew. Michael dropped to one knee, his height now level with Alex's olive green body. Due to the late morning sun, streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns onto the polished wooden floor, and bathing them both in hues of gold and crimson. The warm light seemed to soften the weight of the moment, wrapping them in a cocoon of intimacy amidst the vastness of the chapel. "I'm so sorry, Alex," Michael said, his voice cracking as he reached out and pulled his son into a tight embrace. The boy's small frame was enveloped in his father's strong arms, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "I should have listened to you sooner. I should have trusted you. You've always been my hero, Alex. But today..." Michael's voice faltered, and he swallowed hard before continuing. "Today, you saved me." Alex blinked back tears, but his father's words struck something deep within him. His small hands clung to the lapels of Michael's tuxedo, and for the first time in what felt like months, he felt truly safe. "I just didn't want anything bad to happen to you, Dad," he whispered, his voice muffled against his father's chest. "I didn't know if you'd believe me, but I had to try." Michael pulled back slightly, his hands resting firmly on Alex's small shoulders. He looked at his son with an expression of pure admiration, the corners of his lips lifting into a faint but genuine smile. "You're the bravest person I know," he said. "Never doubt that, Alex." The soft rustling of the guests behind them barely registered. Some had begun to leave quietly, their faces etched with a mix of concern and relief. Others remained seated, whispering in hushed tones about the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. But for Michael and Alex, the rest of the room faded away, leaving only the unspoken bond between them. Michael stood, taking Alex's hand in his own. Together they turned toward the grand double doors of the chapel. The heavy wooden doors had been left slightly ajar, and through the opening, the world outside seemed impossibly bright. The sunlight spilled in, illuminating the steps leading down to the cobblestone path lined with blooming flower beds. The scent of fresh roses and lavender filled the air, carried by a gentle breeze that ruffled Alex's neatly combed curls. As they stepped outside, the warm sun kissed their faces, and for a brief moment, everything felt still. The sky above them was a canvas of brilliant blue, with only a few wispy clouds lazily drifting by. Birds chirped in the distance, their songs weaving a melody that contrasted sharply with the tension and drama that had unfolded just moments before. Alex glanced up at his father, his small hand still tightly clasped in Michael's. There was a newfound lightness in Michael's expression, a sense of release, as though a great burden had been lifted from his shoulders. His once tense features now softened as he looked down at Alex with a gentle smile. "Where do we go now?" Alex asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and a hint of nervousness. Michael paused for a moment, as if considering the question, not just in terms of their physical destination, but in the broader context of their lives. He took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. "Forward, buddy," he said finally, his tone steady and resolute. "We leave all of this behind and start fresh. Together." Alex nodded, his trust in his father unwavering. "Together," he echoed, the word carrying a weight of its own. They began walking down the cobblestone path, their footsteps soft against the stone. The sound of the chapel doors closing behind them felt final, like the closing of a chapter. But with each step they took, the heaviness of what had transpired seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. As they reached the edge of the garden, Michael knelt once more, his hand brushing a stray curl from Alex's forehead. "I know things have been hard," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion. "But I promise you, Alex, no more secrets, no more doubts. From now on, it's just us, facing everything together." Alex smiled, his young face lighting up with a mixture of relief and hope. "I like that," he said simply. The sound of a car engine rumbled softly in the distance as Michael stood and led Alex toward the waiting vehicle. The driver, a kind-faced man who had worked for the family for years, opened the door and gave them a reassuring nod. "Everything all right, Mr. Matthews?" he asked gently. Michael hesitated for only a moment before responding. "It will be," he said firmly, "thanks to this little guy." As they climbed into the car, the soft leather seats enveloped them in comfort. Alex leaned against his father's side, his small hand still gripping Michael's as if to anchor himself in the newfound security of their bond. The car pulled away from the chapel, its tires crunching softly against the gravel, and the building faded into the distance, becoming just another part of the past they were leaving behind. The road ahead stretched out under the brilliant sun, winding through fields of wild flowers and distant rolling hills. It was a path unknown, filled with uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, both father and son felt ready to face it. The weight of betrayal and fear had been replaced by something far stronger: love, trust, and the unbreakable bond between them. As the car rounded a bend, Alex turned to look at his father, his eyes wide with curiosity. "What's next, Dad?" he asked. Michael smiled, his hand resting on Alex's shoulder. "Whatever we want it to be," he said. "As long as we're together, we can handle anything." And as they drove on, the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to embrace them, wrapping their journey in warmth and promise. For Michael and Alex, this wasn't just the end of a difficult chapter. It was the beginning of a story they would write together, one filled with hope, resilience, and the unwavering love of a father and his son. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it touched your heart or inspired you in any way, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. And if you want to hear more stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from us. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content, and together we can spread positivity and inspiration to even more people. Let's build a community where kindness and compassion are celebrated. Join us and let's make the world a better place, one story at a time.